First up is a hidden use for the mysterious rune Slate that you can find very early on in Baldur's Gate 3 within the Nautiloid. Seemingly useless, this rune Slate actually has a use later on, so make sure to click on it when you first encounter it on the Nautiloid in the room with us. You will use it after completing the quest Help Omelum Investigate the Parasite when he offers you the Ring of Mind Shielding. This is because you'll need to convince Omelum to part with the ring since he says it is priceless. By proposing to describe the inner structure of a Nautiloid for him, you can roll a DC 10 intelligence check, which you will have advantage on if you read the rune Slate on the Nautiloid, which flashed the schematics of the Nautiloid directly into your mind. So by reading this seemingly useless rune Slate in the second room of the game, it will actually help you acquire the Ring of Mind Shielding from Omelum. And next up is a hidden use for the personal note found on Gomwick's corpse in Act 1. Gomwick is a courier for the Sword Coast Couriers and unfortunately met his end and is reduced to just being known as the corpse next to where you find Scratch. But Gomwick's letters can actually be picked up and brought back to the Sword Coast Couriers for some additional dialogue. Danzo will explain how it's such a shame since Gomwick was a great courier and how couriers are hard to come by these days. He'll take the personal note from you and then start talking about his missing pigeons. So although there is no reward for bringing Gomwick's letters back to Danzo, you do get a bit of extra dialogue for doing so. And next up, did you know Boots of Speed doesn't actually give your enemies disadvantage on their opportunity attacks, but instead gives it to you? We can actually confirm this by looking at the combat log. As you can see, our enemy does not have a disadvantage on their opportunity attacks as we provoke them, and if we get nice and close to an enemy and we use click heals followed by command approach to force an enemy to attack, we can see in the combat log that we actually have disadvantage on our opportunity attacks. If you take a peek at the code, you can actually see that the issue is that disadvantage is being applied to attack roll instead of attack target. So Boots of Speed doesn't actually give your enemies disadvantage on their opportunity attacks, it instead gives it to you. Now if you love these boots like I do, hopefully they will get fixed in patch 7, and for those of you wondering, you can get the Boots of Speed by curing Thola, the Iron Hand gnome who is wounded near Spa in the Myconid colony. Interestingly, there are a lot of ways to cure Thola, from using the Dwergar antidote, any antidote, casting Lesser Restoration or protection from poison on her, or even lay on hands will all work to cure her. Once cured, you need to offer to save her friends as well, and then she will give you the boots. Now, even if these boots don't give your enemies disadvantage on opportunity attacks and instead give that to you, doubling your movement speed for the cost of a bonus action is in fact amazing. However, unlike Cunning Action Dash, you can only use this once to double your movement speed. I learned that the hard way, so if you use it a second time, it's not actually going to do anything for you. And next up is Gerson the Bent. This NPC is one of the rarest NPCs in the game that most players miss. The only way to see this secret tiefling is if you keep at least one party member near the entrance of the grove at the same time that you defeat the last of the 3 goblin leaders. Then, when you switch back to that character after the last leader is dead, you'll get a cutscene with this NPC. Gerson only has one line and there's no dialogue options, so it's really more of a monologue that you listen to, but it's a quick few lines of Gerson telling you if you heard that the goblin leaders have been slain and the others are gathering near the gate. This cutscene is to subtly move the tiefling refugees to the front of the grove without you noticing them teleporting, and it is a very subtle character that most players certainly miss since you'd probably never leave one of your party members back at the grove during the pinnacle fight of Act 1. And next up is the best Spore servant to raise with Glut. This Spore servant is invincible and is the most game-breaking bug I've ever seen. By letting Arabella die to Korga when you first meet her, you can steal Arabella's corpse and bring it to Glut to reanimate. Once you have Arabella as a Spore servant, she will never actually enter combat, so she can attack as many times as she wants and she will never be attacked. This is because children can't die in Baldur's Gate 3, so she has free reign to destroy everything. Her stats aren't great, but as you know from my previous videos, you can equip and give potions to your minions, so with an elixir of Hill Giant Strength and a proper weapon, she can probably clear all of Act 1 and 2 for you if you wanted to. This is definitely one of the most game-breaking exploits I've ever seen. And next up is how to summon Mahkloompah's army. Mahkloompah's army exists of 7 allies, 1 champion of Mahkloompah, which will smite enemies dealing significant damage. You will have 4 proselytes of Mahkloompah and 2 devotees of Mahkloompah. The champion and devotees are actually Sawagons, which are strong, but the proselytes are Kuo-Toa, mainly good for your enemies to get a good fish fry going. Now, to be able to summon Mahkloompah Mahkloompah's army in Act 1 within the Festering Cove of the Underdark, you will find a group of Kuo-Toa worshipping Bual. If you choose the Investigate option to understand what's going on, you can discover Bual is nothing more than a common red cap. If you then choose the Performance Dialogue option, you can trick the red cap into losing his disguise. Once revealed, you can choose the dialogue option that you will kill him and claim the power for yourself, and then combat will ensue between just you and Bual. If you defeat him, the Kuo-Toa will name you their god and give you your true name, which is Mahkloompah. They will then ask what is your first commandment, and if you tell them to go out and build you an army, they in fact will, and you can summon them during the final fight. And next up, did you know there are a ton of hidden dialogue options if you choose to multi-class as both a paladin and a cleric? In early access, paladins had the option to choose a deity to worship, but it was scrapped and it's now a cleric only feature. Or is it? If for example you multi-classed as a cleric of Selûne and paladin, you can actually acquire the tag Paladin of Selûne and unlock super hidden dialogue choices that only a paladin of Selûne would have available. And since there are a large number of deities in Baldur's Gate 3, there is a ton of hidden dialogue that most players probably missed, such as this dialogue you get when promising Nettie that you'll drink the wyvern poison. I did notice that if your latest level up was as a cleric, then you'll get the cleric dialogue option instead of the paladin option. So if you want to make sure to get this hidden dialogue, you'll probably need to make sure that the last level up you chose was in paladin. And next up is a hidden interaction within the Rosy Morn Monastery. Right above the entrance to the Githyanki Crest, there is a puzzle which unlocks the gate containing the Dawnmaster's Crest. The Dawnmaster's Crest is extremely important because it can be inserted into a mechanism protecting the Blood of Lathander to deactivate its security, and it allows you to retrieve the legendary weapon without any trouble. However, did you know that you don't actually need to bring the ceremonial weapons to their proper places? Now yes, you can pass a DC 30 sleight of hand check to just lockpick the gate, but you can also just place any weapon of the same type required for the puzzle, and that can also be used to open the gate to the Dawnmaster's Crest. You'll even get unique dialogue from your avatar mentioning that they're surprised that any weapon works in this scenario. And next up is a hidden interaction with Glut. This is one of my favorites. If you ever wanted to immediately save Balin and retrieve the noble stock from the field of Biberbang in the Underdark, this is the fastest and most convenient way. Just head to Sovereign Spa and accept the quest to defeat the Duergar. Go near Glut and he'll ask to join you. Just let him and then head to the field of Biberbang immediately instead of heading to the Duergar down by the beach. Glut, being a Myconid, will not activate the Biberbang mushrooms, allowing you to simply ungroup him, take control of him, bring Balin his pack by just dragging it over to him, and then drag the noble stock over to your group without ever having to enter the field of Biberbang. Now this is definitely the easiest, the fastest, and the most convenient way to save Balin and get the noble stock in Act 1 immediately. And next up is Scratch's amazing hidden ability. Scratch is the only summon in the entire game with an incredibly powerful ability. It's not only the fact that he can find treasure mounds easily, but he actually has the ability to use Help. Now Help is amazing because it can remove unwanted statuses such as burning and webbed, gaping wounds, sleeping, prone, and most importantly, downed. This is amazing for the Ketheric fight to help Dame Aelin by throwing an invisibility potion at him and using him to start the fight. You can also use Scratch to free Astarion during the Cazador fight, or help save Morgandians within the Iron Throne, and of course Scratch can help a downed teammate, which is huge. Now to get Scratch, just head north from the Blighted Village until you find the slain mailman. From there, pass a couple dialogue checks with Scratch, letting him sniff you so that he can follow you to camp, and eventually you'll get Scratch's ball, letting you summon him. Scratch can also help you discover buried treasure, which can be very helpful considering there's actually some buried treasure in Baldur's Gate 3 that doesn't even trigger a survival check, so Scratch can really help out there. And next up is the best weapon in Baldur's Gate 3. This weapon is the Titanstring bow. This bow comes with a weapon feature which adds additional damage equal to your strength modifier, and it gets added an additional time when you use any special arrow. For example, an arrow of fire will deal its additional fire damage and also receive bonus fire damage equal to your strength modifier with this bow. The same goes for an arrow of Ilmater, dealing bonus necrotic damage and so on. Titan weapon, that weapon feature, also gets added to sneak attack, which means with an elixir of Hill Giant strength, attacking a target you have advantage against with a special arrow will add 15 damage total. Check out Astarion one-shot this ogre, dealing 44 damage with a single attack at level 3. This truly makes Titanstring bow one of the best weapons in the game, and to get the Titanstring bow, all you need to do is deliver the Caravan Strongbox to the Zentrum in Act 1, which means completing the quest Find the Missing Shipment, and that will unlock the special special stock of Brem the Trader found within the Zentrum hideout. Once done, Brem can sell you this bow. However, if you really want the Iron Flask instead, you can also find the Titanstring bow later in Act 2 being sold by Lan Tarv on the main floor of Moonrise Towers. And next up is a hidden reward you can earn within the Hag's Lair. When you encounter the gnarled door in the entrance gallery, you'll notice there are 4 masks laying on the table called Whispering Masks. These masks will periodically cast ephemeral whispers on you, attempting to charm whoever wears them, bending their mind to the will of the Green Hag. But if you cast Protection from Evil and Good on your character before putting on the mask, even if you fail the saving throw against ephemeral whispers, you cannot be charmed. This allows you to walk past and keep alive the other victims who are wearing the Whispering Masks without slaying them, allowing you to even talk to them and even freeing them from the Green Hag without killing them. But you can also get inspiration called One of Us by peacefully bypassing the Hag's thralls if you have a charlatan background, which Astarion has. And next up is how to gain permanent immunity to Frightened and Possession. This can be done through the spell Protection from Evil and Good, which incorrectly prevents possession and fear from all creature types while you have it on, not just the listed creature types. The spell lists aberrations, celestials, fae, fiends, and undead as the types of creatures that you cannot be charmed, frightened, or possessed by, but turns out when you use this spell on yourself, you're giving yourself immunity to those conditions against all creature types, which is absolutely amazing. However, the spell is bugged in another way. It actually does not apply immunity to charmed to any creature type whatsoever, but you are immune to frightened and possession from all creature types, which is absolutely incredible. You can cast this spell as a paladin, cleric, warlock, or wizard, and you can also be granted the spell from the Ever-Seeing Eye in Auntie Ethel's lair in Act 1, or even find it on a scroll. And next up is how to kill Grym with just a torch. I saw a very interesting Reddit thread about how you can just throw torches at Grym to kill him, and it's an easy way to win the fight, supposedly. So I decided to put it to the test. I created an Eldritch Knight thrower so that we can bind the torch and it returns to us after being thrown, and I was ready to test it. Torches gain the burning condition when they are equipped as a weapon, and supposedly any fire damage can cause the superheated condition on Grym, which makes it vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. After placing the mold and mithril into the forge, I stood at the top of the ledge and shot an arrow at the lava valve to start the fight. Now obviously the fight is much easier from up here already, but after waiting for superheated to wear off, I threw my torch to put this to the test and was immediately surprised to see that not only did Grym not take any bludgeoning damage or fire damage, instead I took fire damage. Apparently there is a bug where if you throw a burning weapon, the thrower takes the burning damage, not the target. So great, the torch method definitely does not work. But in that very same Reddit thread, users also claimed that any fire damage can cause the superheated condition, which makes Grym vulnerable to bludgeoning. And since when I threw it, I was taking the fire damage, we still had to try to use some fire damage on Grym. So I brought a Gale with me to cast Firebolt, and it turns out Grym is actually completely immune to fire damage. So he can't become superheated from any fire damage, it's only coming from lava. So this Reddit thread is failing pretty hard until I see a comment by Intentional mentioning that their favorite method to defeat Grym is using Minor Illusion to lure Grym under the hammer. So I cast Minor Illusion on the opposite edge as Grym. He chased it and was left perfectly positioned under the hammer. Then all it takes is a shot from a bow on the forge level and bam, massive damage. Grym will wander back under you, becoming superheated again by the lava, and then you can just rinse and repeat. And so while the torch method definitely does not work, and neither does any fire damage cause superheated, just lava, it seems that Minor Illusion from the cliff is a pretty cool way to cheese the Grym fight. And next up is a hidden interaction if you are a Cleric of Lolth as a Lolth-Sworn Drow, and you try to take Falar Luve in the Underdark by following the ritual. Now, not only do you get advantage on the religion check to understand if there is a ritual to the blade, if you follow through and perform said ritual, you will actually get special dialogue of the narrator saying that Lolth is warning you for performing the ritual of Aelestray. You feel spiders crawling down your spine, and Falar Luve itself will actually glow red with the symbol of Lolth. Now, there's no actual real negative consequence of doing this, so it is worth doing just to see this special hidden interaction, and doing so also awards the Last Rites of the Dark Dancer inspiration for anyone with an Acolyte background, which includes Shadowheart. And it's worth mentioning, if you try to disguise as a Lolth-Sworn Drow, surprisingly it does not let you experience this cutscene. Even if you are a Cleric of Lolth, you actually have have to truly be one you can't disguise. And next up, did you know Cazador is in Act 1? Cazador will appear in Act 1 through a portal that seemingly appears out of thin air. Now, in order to trigger this super rare cutscene, you'll need to be playing an Astarion Origin playthrough and take your first long rest after attempting to enter the mountain pass. This cutscene shows that even while Astarion is trying to sleep, Cazador is haunting him. Now, whether it's actually Cazador communicating to Astarion through sleep, or it's just a bad dream, it really shows how much of an effect Cazador has had on Astarion, even after being infected with the Mind Flayer Tadpole, which freed him of Cazador's control. And next up is one of the rarest interactions in Baldur's Gate 3. If you talk to Lakrissa, who is above Zevlor's chamber in the Druid's Grove in Act 1, she'll bet you that she won't survive all of this. If you take her up on that offer and bet that she will survive, you can actually cash in on that bet in Act 3. You can find Lakrissa waiting tables at the Elf Song Tavern, and if Elfira also survived, you can find both of them on the roof. Not only do you get to enjoy some rare dialogue with Lakrissa, but you also get an inspiration point if you have a folk hero background, which Will and Minsk have, which is called A Bet is a Bet. It's totally worth checking out, especially if you want to learn more about Elfira and Lakrissa. And next up is Topaz's secret stash. Within the Emerald Grove of Act 1, you can find a bird named Topaz who is fussing over whether or not his gold coin is placed absolutely center within his nest. But within the nest is also a shiny key. By choosing the correct dialogue options, you can acquire this key, but you might be wondering, what is this key even used for? Now, it turns out at the top of the pillars, just northwest of the nest, is actually a chest which the key unlocks. Inside the chest is some gold, a silver ingot, and a scroll of gaseous form. And next up is the hidden Harper cache. There's actually more than one. Now, the one we're talking about is actually located in the Grym Forge and is defended by 3 mimics. Now, the loot is not bad and includes a rare pair of gloves known as the Wondrous Gloves. These gloves grant +1 AC, and if you have Bardic Inspiration, you gain 1 more use of it. Not only that, but like most items that grant you a charge of anything, it can be unequipped and re-equipped to refresh that charge, meaning you can get infinite Bardic Inspiration points through these gloves. Now we're talking about some good loot here. You can also find a Scroll of Evidence in the Harper cache, which details the Harper's intentions of allying with the Emerald Enclave in order to stop Ketheric Thorm. And next up, did you know that the Necromancy of Thay is easier to read for some classes and even some origin characters? Now, for the majority of classes, turning the 3 pages of the Necromancy of Thay in Act 1 will require a DC 10, 15, and 20 Wisdom saving throw. However, there are 5 classes that have it easier. The Bard is tied for easiest rolls. They only need to pass a DC 5, 10, and 15 performance check. Sorcerers have the same difficulty but need to pass charisma checks. And then Warlocks can pass the first check easier than the other classes with a nice and easy DC 5 charisma save, but then the following 2 saves are the exact same as everyone else. And then Clerics, who worship an evil god, can have their final roll be reduced to a DC 15 wisdom check instead of a DC 20 wisdom saving throw. Now, Szarr is included in the list of evil gods, so Shadowheart will have an easier time reading the Necromancy of Thay, but there is one other origin character who has a similar bonus, which is Astarion. His final roll can be reduced to a DC 15 wisdom check rather than a DC 20 wisdom saving throw, with a unique dialogue option which reads, "Drink in the darkness, embracing it, and turn the page." So next time you're thinking about reading the Necromancy of Thay and aren't really sure which class to give it to, now you know who can pass the saving throws or checks the easiest. And next up, many of you have been asking if the Tarnished charm works on anyone else other than Ethel. If you're not familiar, this charm is found on Auntie Ethel's corpse, and if you leave it on her and you speak with dead, she will actually talk to you fairly normally. No pauses between words, and it doesn't sound like she's struggling to speak. But if you loot the Tarnished charm off her corpse and then you speak with dead, she will speak like all the other corpses, slowly with pauses between words. And so everyone was asking, does the Tarnished charm work on other corpses? Well, I decided to put it to the test. I grabbed the charm from Auntie and threw it on the corpse of the Drow in the Emerald Grove. I used Speak with Dead, and it's the same old dialogue. Bummer. But if you think about it, that is a lot of Speak with Dead dialogue that they would have to re-record, an ad for every single corpse if you place the Tarnished charm on it. So I wasn't optimistic that it would be any different, but at least now we know. And next up is the hidden Cauldron of Boiling Theriac. This secret cauldron can only be seen when holding down Alt, and previously was actually used to craft. The book next to the cauldron, titled On Antidotes, teaches you how to craft an antidote, and the mugwort near the cauldron was previously able to be placed into the cauldron to craft that antidote. But now there is no way to interact with the cauldron anymore, and it's actually been this way since patch 1. So why did Larian remove the crafting at the cauldron, and why hasn't it been added back in yet? Now I suspect that teaching players to craft at the cauldron would make them think maybe this is the only way to craft, and would have players going back to the Emerald Grove over and over to do their alchemy. And then they may never open the alchemy menu, which actually allows you to extract ingredients and craft potions, elixirs, and so on. So this hidden cauldron of boiling Theriac will likely never be able to be used ever again. And next up is how to get infinite XP in Act 1. Doing this is pretty simple. All you need to do is fight Gek down in the Underdark beach. Start out by killing off his allies and then slaying the zombies he summons. Then flee from combat, and when you engage Gek again, he'll actually summon his zombies again, and you can slay them and flee over and over for infinite XP. Now each zombie grants 3 XP, so it will be a very slow process, but you can speed it up by playing as Dark Urge and having the Deathstalker mantle, which turns you invisible after slaying an enemy. This allows you to easily reset the fight over and over and harvest the XP from the zombies Gek summons for infinite XP. But since it's only 3 XP per zombie, you're also going to need infinite patience. Alright, and next up is how to deal infinite damage with Gale. Now in Act 1, if you kill Gale, he dies and creates a necrotic aura that deals 1d4 necrotic damage each turn. However, when you first become afflicted by the aura, it immediately deals that 1d4 necrotic damage. So if we put dead Gale into a container, we can move his aura in and out of range of our enemies to repeatedly deal that 1d4 necrotic damage over and over. And since moving items doesn't cost any actions or bonus actions, you can kill any enemy using this method. Now the hardest part about this is actually carrying Gale around, since it will deal 1d4 necrotic damage to you as you carry it, so you may want to store Gale in your traveler's chest until you're ready to deploy him. And next up is how to get around locked gates using one of the least popular classes, the Druid. Druids have Wild Shape Badger, which gives them the ability to burrow. This class action only costs some movement speed and an action, and can be incredibly useful for getting around locked barred doors. This is very handy for looting the Act 1 Zhentarim basement, or any other time you are blocked by a locked barred door. Just burrow, steal, and burrow back out. And next up is how to deal infinite damage using vents. Vents typically exhaust noxious fumes or poison, which cause area of effect damage. These area of effects deal damage instantly upon afflicting their target, and then each turn deal their damage again. But since the damage is done immediately upon entering, we can abuse this by luring an enemy to a vent and then uncovering the vent to deal that instant damage, followed by covering the vent and uncovering it again to deal the damage over and over. Since moving an item on the ground doesn't cost an action or bonus action, we can move an object on and off the vent repeatedly to deal infinite damage to our enemy. Now there aren't a whole lot of vents in the game where enemies are nearby, but there are quite a few in the Hag's Lair and near the Spectator Ambush in the Underdark if you find yourself in a close fight and need to get creative. And next up is how to get Counselor Floric to join you. Counselor Floric is first encountered at Joaquin's Rest, trapped within a burning building. Once you enter Joaquin's Rest for the very first time, you'll need to rescue her to prevent her from dying. If she survives this, then later in Act 3, you'll find her within Worm's Rock Prison. You'll need to convince her that the fight is not over, and then lead her to safety by escaping the prison. Players can miss Counselor Floric if they don't check the jail cells, or if they long rest too many times, because this is actually one of the very few time-sensitive quests in Act 3. If you do not save Counselor Floric from the prison within 5 long rests, she will be executed. And your reward in the final fight is 3 highly defensive melee fighters known as Floric's Cohort, which utilize Reach. Certainly not the strongest of allies, but allies nonetheless. And next up is how to get Clan Flameshade to join you. This group of Duergar are looking for coin, not greatness, and act accordingly. Found within the Grimforge, you can make a deal with Elder Brithvar and his clan to team up to take Nier down and split the gold on his corpse. This is actually a great step to take before you free Nier, so that you have allies before all hell breaks loose. If you choose the right dialogue options, you'll end up just fighting Nier and a handful of Duergar instead of Nier and all of the Duergar. Then, once the fight is over, you don't even even need to pay Elder Brithvar. You can pass some dialogue checks or detect his thoughts to get out of having to pay him or fight him. Then you can just walk away, although if you did turn on him, you could get even more XP. And next up is how to steal the best spellbook in the game. I'm talking about none other than the Necromancy of Thay, hidden beneath the Blighted Village, locked behind a barred door and a marble plate. Just like in the House of Hope, we can actually place an item on the plate and steal the book without triggering the trap, because the marble plate is actually a pressure plate, activating the trap only when there is no pressure on the plate. This little switcheroo maneuver can save you the trouble of having to disarm the marble plate and potentially save you from taking some nasty fire damage. And the Necromancy of Thay is totally worth getting, because not only does it grant you the ability to speak with dead, it also grants forbidden knowledge, which gives you +1 to wisdom saving throws and ability checks, which is very nice. And the book truly is the gift that keeps on giving, because in Act 3 you can read it again to learn the spell Dance Macabre, which summons 4 ghouls that explode on death, which can be very helpful. And next up, did you know that spiked bulbs cause bleeding 100% of the time? This is amazing with Buwal's Benediction, which grants all party members advantage on their attack rolls against bleeding targets. And spike bulbs are pretty rare to come across. You can find them early on in the Nautiloid during the prologue, but other than that, the only way to get them is by completing the quest Help Omelum Investigate the Parasite and unlocking the ability to trade with it. Omelum in the Myconid colony then becomes the only source for additional spiked bulbs. And the combos don't end there. If you have a Wild Heart Barbarian, you can cause enemies to skip their turns by combining Aspect of the Wolverine, which causes enemies to become maimed when you make them bleed, which reduces their movement speed to 0. Then you can follow that up with Diving Strike, which makes the target prone. When your enemy has 0 movement speed, that means they can't get out of prone, and therefore don't get a turn. And next up is a secret wizard scroll transcription method. Wizards are the only class that can learn spells by right-clicking on a scroll and selecting the Learn option. However, if you love to save items for later, like me, you might end up with a ton of scrolls that you might want to learn. That's where this secret method comes in handy. If you open your spellbook, which is just to the right of your character tab, you can find a small button above your prepared spells called Learn More Spells. If you click this option, it opens a new window listing out every single spell scroll you have, showing the quantity of each scroll, the level of the spell, the gold cost, and which scrolls are in the School of Magic you get discounts in, along with how much gold you have at the bottom. You can even check multiple boxes to learn as many of the scrolls you want all at once. This secret menu is much easier to navigate than the inventory, so next time you plan on learning new spells, use this awesome menu. And next up is how to get some easy inspiration as the Dark Urge. When you first encounter the ogres within the Blighted Village, there are a couple of ways to get Lump's Horn, which lets you summon the ogres. You can offer them gold, or you can offer them the corpses of your enemies to eat as payment. If you choose the option offering the corpses and subsequently succeed the DC 20 dialogue check, you will be awarded an inspiration point called Creatures of Bloodlust and 60 XP, but only during a Dark Urge Origin playthrough. And next up are the Spiderstep Boots. These boots grant immunity to Unwebbed and makes your movement speed unaffected by web surfaces. These are perfect for navigating and fighting the phase spiders and ettercaps within the Whispering Depths. And best of all, these are actually located within the Whispering Depths, so you can easily pick them up before you start combat. Just head left immediately after entering from the well in the Blighted Village. Within that area, there's also 4 journals, and if you read all 4 with a sage background companion, such as Gale, you'll get an inspiration point as well called a Solitary Spider. And next up is the Forbidden Arcane. If you purchase the book Onolithid's Volume XXVI from Omelum and read it, it will actually provide you with an inspiration point called the Forbidden Arcane if anyone in your party has a sage background, which includes Gale. So if Gale is in your party, definitely make sure to purchase this book from Omelum and read it, since it's an inspiration point that's very easy to obtain. However, this book is not for sale immediately upon encountering Omelum. You'll need to progress the quest Help Omelum Investigate the Parasite, and after completing it, this book will become available for sale. Now, interestingly, this very same book can also be purchased from Nancy Greta, the owner of the Bibliophile, which is a bookstore located in the Lower City in Act 3. So if you missed this book for your sage in Act 1 and moved on to Act 3, worry not, you can still purchase it from Nancy for that inspiration point called the Forbidden Arcane. And next up is Mahkloompah's Faithful, the NPC most players miss. This is a goblin within the Shattered Sanctum who is trapped within a wooden cage. Instead of converting to worship the Absolute, Brakal has stayed faithful to Mahkloompah, the goblin goblin deity of blood and conquest. If you free Brakal from his prison alive, you will be rewarded with an inspiration point called Saving the Heretic for companions with an Acolyte background, which includes Shadowheart. You'll also need to be careful when freeing him. Not only is the door to the cage locked, but it's also trapped, so you'll need a trap disarm toolkit. The key, however, can just be found on Warrior Clack, so you don't need to pick the lock. And next up is a hidden interaction with Benrin. This man is pinned beneath debris in a burning building at Joaquin's Rest. If you start a dialogue with him, he will ask you for help, and you'll have 3 dialogue choices. You can use your strength to remove the debris, look for something to use as leverage, or you can just leave. If you choose to just leave and then sit there and watch him as he bursts into flames, you will actually be awarded with an inspiration point called Fresh Kindle for the Fire during a Dark Urge playthrough. Very sinister indeed, and very fitting for the Dark Urge. And next up is the Secrets of the High Chieftain. This is actually quite hidden, and most players probably miss it. On the top of the tower in the center of the goblin camp in Act 1 is a goblin named Booyag Piddle. He's carrying a book called On Goblins, My Life Among the Conquering Host. By either slaying Piddle or pickpocketing this book and then reading it, you will be awarded with an inspiration point for any sage within your party, which includes Gale. The book can also possibly be found near a wicker basket and a pile of food waste, but still on the top of this tower. The inspiration earned is called Secrets of the High Chieftain, and this secret book was actually written by Volo. And what's really great is that this inspiration point is on demand. You can wait to read the book whenever you've run out of inspiration points and need more, so it's perfect for when you can't afford to fail rolls for that on-demand inspiration. And next up is how to get Arabella to join you. Arabella grants you a passive permanent bonus called Weave Walker, which is essentially a permanent freedom of movement. Difficult terrain can't slow you down, and you can't be magically paralyzed or restrained. To get this, in Act 1 you'll need to save Arabella from Korga and then side with the tieflings to defeat the goblin leaders. Then, later in Act 2, you'll need to find Arabella again, who is looking for her parents. Complete that quest by finding Arabella's parents and give the news to Arabella, and make sure to later speak to her again after a long rest in order to actually complete the quest. She won't join unless you have that follow-up conversation. You'll then later run into Arabella again in Act 3 within the lower city sewers, where she will tell you that you will meet again, which you will during the final fight. And next up are the Acolytes of the Demon Web Pits. Within the Underdark, where you'll find many worshippers of Lolth, there is one in particular seeking to convert others into her fold. Lair Xanta is giving a speech to other members of the Lair clan, Lair Jox, Lair Fu, and Lair Otan, trying to sway them to leave Father Mermath, the head of Clan Lair. If you help Lair Xanta convince the others to leave the Duergar for Lolth, not only will they not attack you if you turn on the Duergar, you'll also be awarded with an Acolyte background inspiration point called Acolytes of the Demon Web Pits. But of the options available, the only one that actually awards the inspiration is the Persuasion option, which says, I think your sister is right. Among the Spider Queen's worshippers, you'll reach your true potential. Now, the other options may lead them to leave for Lolth, but they don't actually award this inspiration. And next up is a Unified Spirit. This Acolyte background inspiration is actually very rare because you can only get the dialogue options to obtain it if you are a cleric worshipping a number of mostly good deities: Tyr, Ilmater, Moradin, Corellan Lorethian, Illustre, Lathander, and Maliki, or Helm. Or if you are a paladin, you'll also get the dialogue option. Now, to get this, you need to pray with Fist Recruit Ephron at Joaquin's Rest through selecting the specific dialogue option, and since Shadowheart is a cleric who worships Szarr, she doesn't have the dialogue option. But if you have a paladin who prays with the Fist Recruit, for example, then Shadowheart actually will still be awarded the inspiration point because of her Acolyte background. And next up is an inspiration that 99% of players probably haven't triggered. In order to get this super hidden point of inspiration, you'll need to dance with Thay during the end of Act 1 camp party while you have an entertainer background. Now, chances are you probably haven't even heard of Thay. Thay is a tiefling that only appears if Lakrissa has been knocked out or slain before the end of Act 1 celebration when you defeat the goblin leaders. To get this inspiration, all you need to do is approach Thay, who has clearly had too many to drink, and successfully dance during dialogue. Do this successfully and you'll get the inspiration called Celebrant. Interestingly enough, you can only get this inspiration point if you dance with Thay, since there is no option to dance with Lakrissa nor any other tiefling during that party. Even though Bex does make an attempt but had too much to drink, this makes this inspiration one that probably 99% of players miss. And next up is a hidden interaction only available during a female Drow playthrough. Within the Underdark of Act 1, you can find a Drow named Dorn who is petrified. After you defeat the spectator, you can talk to Dorn and learn more about his quest. However, if your character is a female Drow, you'll get special dialogue options to demand both respect and the memory shard from him, leveraging your role within the Drow matriarchy. Not only are these fun dialogue options, but it's also an easier way to obtain the memory shard from him. On top of that, if you have a character with a noble background, such as Minthara, it also awards inspiration called Know Your Place. And this trick also works even if you are just disguised as a female Drow. And next up is Chicken Chase Extraordinaire. This reward can be earned by winning a match of Chicken Chase. Within the Goblin camp, there's a chicken running around, which is part of a game the goblins are playing. By talking to Krolla, you can sign up for this game after having Volo stop his singing, and then once it's begun, to win the match, you can use Speak with Animals and then pass a persuasion check to convince the chicken to cooperate, or you can force it to run past the goalpost by standing behind the goal and then using Command Approach. Either way, once you succeed in the game, you are awarded with the inspiration called Chicken Chase Extraordinaire if you have an entertainer background. Also, you can go back to Krolla and pass a dialogue check to get gold as a reward too. And next up is a hidden interaction with Liam. Liam is a captured human within the Shattered Sanctum who is being tortured. During a Dark Urge playthrough, if you select the options to torture Liam yourself by progressing through 2 rounds of torture on Liam, at the end of it you will be awarded with inspiration called Grabbing the Poker with Both Hands. Although it is gruesome, the point of inspiration is totally worth it, and best of all, if you actually finish Liam off, on his corpse you'll find a hidden Potion of Invisibility. And next up is a super rare event that you can trigger if you save Smithin from his lethal fall within the Shattered Sanctum. Upon passing Priestess Gut, you can encounter Smithin about to be pushed into the Spider Pit. Moments after you see him, he will be pushed. However, it is possible to save Smithin from his fall. Now, the easiest way I've found it to save him is to use Minor Illusion after entering turn-based mode. Exit turn-based mode, and once all the goblins are near the illusion, cast another one a little further away again. Once they're far enough away, Smithin will actually talk to you and thank you for saving him, and you'll get 35 XP as he runs out the main entrance, and you'll also get an inspiration point called Saved by a Thread if you have a party member with a folk hero background, which Will has. And next up is a hidden inspiration point you can earn for simply playing a tune on a goblin war drum. To do this, find the nearest war drum and choose the Perform option. It will be a DC 10 performance charisma check, and if you succeed, you get to hear a pretty sweet tune get played. But better yet, you get an inspiration point if you have an entertainer background. A goblin will also tell you how it was a nice tune, but the drum is for calling reinforcements, and you'll get to see some goblins run to your position and get told it's a false alarm. Just some music being played, which is pretty funny. And next up is a hidden reward you can earn if you force Crusher to kiss Shadowheart's feet. Next to the goblin waypoint, Crusher is going on and on about his feats of greatness. If you talk to him, he'll tell you to learn your place and kiss his feet. If you challenge him, you can actually end up in combat with him and his buddies while the other goblins will just watch. If you can defeat just Crusher, he'll actually surrender, and then you can tell him to kiss your feet. If you do, you'll be awarded inspiration called Give Them a Show for anyone with an entertainer background. And next up is the hidden Diatrima in the Underdark. The Diatrima is an ancient, large, flightless bird native to the Underdark. Drow often use their hugely plumed feathers for decoration, and you can actually encounter what we can only assume is the nest of one hidden within the Underdark. Outside the western entrance to the Myconid colony, you can see a massive nest filled with eggshells and a treasure chest. If you jump over to it, you can actually loot the chest and be awarded a point of inspiration for anyone in your party with an Outlander background, which includes Karlach and Halsin. And next up is the secret item hidden within the Carrion Crawler nest within the Underdark. Found while heading towards the Arcane Tower from the Underdark Beach waypoint, there is a strange hole that you can click on, which is the Carrion Crawler nest. And if you are playing either a halfling or a gnome, you will get a dialogue option for being short, which lets you reach into one of the holes. As you reach inside, you'll feel a fleshy tentacle, which will then cause you to roll a wisdom save, pulling your hand out if you fail. However, if you succeed the wisdom save, you'll realize that the tentacle is dead, and beneath it, an item that you can take. By taking the item, you are awarded with both an inspiration point if you have an Outlander background, which Karlach has, and you also get the item, which is a Topaz. Also, you can just use Disguise Self in order to choose the short dialogue option. And next up is a hidden interaction with Flind. Flind is the Null Warlord besieging the Zhentarim caravan survivors. However, if you have not yet used your Illithid powers in dialogue, you can get the option to use them on Flind. It's a tricky dialogue sequence to activate, which is why most players probably miss it. Once dialogue begins, you can learn more about how Flind was infected by the Mind Flayer tadpole, and then get an option to use your Illithid powers to turn her against the other Gnolls. Then, if Flind survives the fight, she will be discontent with the meal, and you'll have 3 options from there. Attack, use your Illithid powers to convince her to leave, or use your powers to make her eat herself. If you use your Illithid powers to make her eat herself, you'll need to pass 2 checks, but if you do, she will carry out the act and you'll be awarded with a Mind Flayer parasite. And since this dialogue is hard to trigger, the best way to get it to trigger is if you start combat as close as you can to Flind. If Flind can get into melee range of you within her very first turn, then it will activate, but if she can't, then this dialogue won't trigger. And next up is a new trader trick that works in patch 7. If you want any item from any trader without paying for it, all you need to have is a level 3 Pact of the Blade Warlock. Simply bind your most expensive weapon, select it, and another item, and then click Add to Wares on both of them. Then go to a trader and open the barter menu and click Add Wares to Offer. This adds your packed weapon, and you can then barter anything you want, and the weapon will stay with you even after you submit barter. This means you can buy things, then get the gold back instantly over and over until the trader has nothing left that you want. You can also use this to improve the attitude of the trader if you barter your bound weapon over and over. It's kind of funny to imagine the traders just getting happier and happier to keep getting the same weapon that somehow you keep trading to them, but hey, somehow it works. Although you do have to have a warlock in your party, you could also use a hireling. And next up is a new armor that was secretly added in patch 7. This armor is called the Bandit's Armor, and to get it to appear is actually very, very rare. You'll need to deliberately remove all of Shadowheart's armor and weapons so that she has no equipment on while you're still on the Nautiloid. Then, when you land on the Ravaged Beach, you'll need to either just walk by Shadowheart, or you'll need to talk to her and deny her request to join your party. Then later, when you find her in the Grove, she will be wearing the Bandit's Armor. This is the only way to ever see this armor, which was just added in patch 7. And unfortunately, this armor is worse both in appearance and in AC compared to her usual chain shirt, the Bandit's Armor only having 11 AC. The same goes for her weapon and shield, and also equipment is also given to Lae'zel. If you do the same exact thing, she will get an armor called Hide Armor, but that can be obtained through other methods than this, making the Bandit Armor one that not many players have ever seen. And next up is some new hidden dialogue added to Ward Magmar in the Grimforge. Now, the only way to trigger this hidden dialogue is if you are playing as a short race, and by choosing the dialogue option, asking how they can get a slave like they have, they'll explain to you that they are all over the place and all you need to do is pin one down. But at your size, it might be tough and that he'd pay money to see you try. And next up is a hidden reward added in patch 7. This reward is so hidden, 99% of players won't even notice if they got it, and it was sneakily added in patch 7. This reward is called No One Left Behind and is awarded if you defeat the goblins attacking the Emerald Grove when you first encounter it. If there are no losses on the tiefling side, canon excluded, he is destined to die. Now, it's not very difficult to do, but it is very difficult to tell if you even got this inspiration, because the moment the fight ends, you get the inspiration, it's on your screen for about half a second, and then this cinematic begins at pretty much the same time. So basically, you need to make sure you have at least one party member with a soldier background, which actually Lae'zel has, so it's not a bad idea to have Lae'zel in your party for that first fight at the Grove for this super hidden inspiration point, which didn't actually even exist until patch 7. First up is how to get Alfira to join you permanently. In patch 7, Larian finally let Alfira join the party during a Dark Urge playthrough temporarily. However, there is a way to get her to stay with you on your adventures as a permanent companion, which is absolutely amazing. Now, she doesn't have any dialogue lines, unfortunately, but she can act as a regular companion when talking to other NPCs and functions nearly as well. To get her to permanently join your party, on the night when Alfira joins your party, have her murder your Dark Urge and then send the Dark Urge's inventory to camp so that they're lighter, and then have Alfira drink a potion of Hill Giant Strength for extra strength, and then pick the Dark Urge's corpse up. That will instantly cause a loading screen, and the next thing you know, you're in the mountain pass with Alfira alive and the Dark Urge dead. Now, from that point on, Alfira is a new permanent companion. Now, there are a couple drawbacks. One is that her health doesn't seem to increase as she levels up, unfortunately, unless you increase the difficulty, which increases it for some reason, so she's not really great against enemies that can deal damage. Also, her clothing won't update when you equip her. She'll always look the same, except sometimes when you level up or change classes, you'll see her clothes update there. So while it's extremely cool to have her appear in cinematics and conversations, she does fall a bit short when it comes to equipment, health, and dialogue lines. Now, on top of that, if she does happen to die, like actually die, not just get downed, which is likely with her reduced health pool, you can't even use a scroll of Revivify on her either, so she'll be permanently dead once again. Now, all these shortcomings are expected since she really isn't supposed to be able to be a permanent companion anyways, but we all can dream. And a big shout out to Horthos, who showed me how to do this. And next up is a new trader trick for patch 7. If the Warlock bound weapon trick isn't your style, here's another one. You'll need a druid and a rune powder barrel. All you need to do is shapeshift into any animal and then try to use the rune powder barrel by double clicking on it, which will do nothing. Then go to a trader and barter the rune powder barrel, and like a bound weapon, it is now stuck with you, letting you take the value of the barrel from the trader over and over until you have everything you want. Now, you can get a rune powder barrel very early on in Act 1. Just head to the Grim Forge, fight 3 slimes as you head towards Philomene, the Iron Hand Gnome, and during dialogue with Philomene, have a second character drink a potion of invisibility or just otherwise go invisible and steal the rune powder barrel from her. Then you've got what you need for the infinite gold and loot from traders. And next up is a hidden dialogue with Crusher. Crusher is the goblin boasting in the goblin camp about how he got to kiss Shadowheart's feet, but during a Dark Urge playthrough, you can actually have a dialogue option to imagine biting his toe off. If you select this option, your screen will turn red and the narrator will describe enveloping the toe in your maw and then the taste of it after you've bitten it off. It's a grisly sight, and unfortunately you don't get the ring that is supposed to be on it either, so it's not necessarily the best dialogue option. And then combat will ensue with just Crusher and his buddies, which you can win if you just defeat Crusher. There's no reward or inspiration for this dialogue option either, unless this is the first time you gave into your urge, in which case you would be awarded with the Indulge Thine Appetites inspiration, which is kind of funny considering you're actually eating a toe in this particular scenario. And next up is how to slay any NPC without causing combat afterwards. To do this, just create a cloud of daggers in town and then drop your favorite explosive nearby, and when you're ready to light it up, just drop an acid vial or caustic bulb into the cloud of daggers. This will cause the item that creates a surface that deals damage over time to detonate the explosive, and surprisingly, the guards will be unable to tie it back to you as the one who did it, letting you walk away blameless. This is because it was not actually you that caused the destruction in the guard's view. It was that nasty cloud of daggers that was responsible, but you can't throw a spell in prison, can you? So if you ever want to get away with murder in town, this is one way to pull it off. And next up is how to deal infinite damage with a fire surface. Now, to do this, all you need to do is create a fire surface at the feet of your target. Alchemist's Fire works great for this. Then once it's your turn, get close but not too close to the fire surface. Then split stacks of smoke powder bombs into stacks of 1 and then drop them from your inventory onto the ground. From there, you can just drag them into the fire surface as close to your enemy as possible, and you can do this as many times as you have smoke powder bombs, since neither dropping items nor moving items on the ground costs an action, which leads to nearly infinite damage as long as you have a fire surface to work with and some smoke powder bombs. And next up is how to get infinite movement speed and infinite damage as well. If you have a character who is a Wild Heart Barbarian with aspect of the Elk, each time you have a character enter the aspect of the Elk aura, you will gain +5 feet bonus to movement speed. speed. If you also have dash on, you'll gain even more. And by moving in and out of the aura, expending less movement than you gain, you can actually accumulate an infinite amount of movement speed. And then by having an infinite amount of movement speed, you can also deal an infinite amount of damage through reverberation caused by Falar Aluve's Shriek. By having the Boots of Stormy Clamor equipped, you can cause 2 turns of reverberation each time you inflict a condition. However, you should only be able to apply this once per turn with Falar Aluve's Shriek, but you can actually apply it over and over if after each time you apply reverberation, you try and talk to the sentient amulet. Now, for some reason, this lets you apply reverberation again from Falar Aluve's Shriek, allowing you to do infinite damage with your infinite movement speed. It also takes a long time to defeat an enemy this way, since reverberation only deals 1d4 thunder damage once the target has 5 or more turns of reverberation, so you'll need to be patient if you use this method, but you can get infinite damage this way. And next up is a new trader trick in patch 7. If you didn't like the Warlock Pact Weapon trick or the Rune Powder Barrel trick in my last video, then you might like this one. By trying to use a water barrel while shapeshifted as a druid, you can essentially bind the water barrel to your character exactly like the Rune Powder Barrel gets bound, and infinitely barter the value of the water barrel for infinite value. All you have to do is have a druid and a water barrel, and then try to use the water barrel while shapeshifted, and when you try to sell it, it will not ever go into the trader's inventory. What I like about this method is that there is always a water barrel located at the waypoint in the Selûnite Outpost in the Underdark, so it's very easy to do this early on. And I would say that this method is much more tedious, since the value of the water barrel is literally 3 gold compared to a Rune Powder Barrel, which is over 1,000. So this is a method you can use almost immediately to get gold fast, but the Rune Powder Barrel will give you more bang for your buck, so to speak. And next up is a group of characters that most players miss: Vatas, Kivek, Kavel, Zay, and Rai. These characters are tieflings that only appear during the end of Act 1 party if you saved the Grove, but also knocked out all the tieflings that should show up at your camp, such as Danis, Icaron, Lakrissa, Gooks, and Bex. These characters are super rare, since most players aren't going to be going around knocking out the tieflings right before the end of Act 1, and it's amazing that there are so many of these stand-in characters. They have their own unique voice lines that are different from the tieflings that they replace, and of course they look different as well, and while you don't gain anything by interacting with them, besides Zay, which actually does offer you some very secret inspiration, it is very cool that they all can exist. And next up is how to triple your movement speed. To do this, all you have to do is use dash, enter turn-based mode, and then dash again, and then enter combat. You'll have triple your usual movement speed. You can use dash once again once you're in combat, and you won't lose any actions by doing this, so there's really no downside. A great time to do this is right before you know combat's about to begin, and it can really help you, especially if you're a melee character. You can also throw in disengage before you enter turn-based mode in order to allow yourself to move around without provoking opportunity attacks. Definitely a really neat trick if you know combat is coming and you want to prepare. And next up is a secret weapon that is actually OP because of its hidden effect. Now, we all know that the open hand monk is one of the strongest builds in the game, but what if I told you there's a way to make it even stronger? A way to make its attacks ignore resistance to bludgeoning damage, which all of the attacks you're punching, with your open hand is bludgeoning damage. This is all possible thanks to an item called the Adamantine Mace. Now, this mace causes your bludgeoning damage to ignore resistance, even if you're not actually using it to make your attacks. Now, to do this, you'll need to have it equipped in your offhand, and this can be done by having your monk dual wield some light weapons and then drag the shield that another character has equipped over to your monk's offhand. This will place the mace into their offhand. Then go to your other character and empty their main hand slot, and then click the empty slot and select the weapon that is currently in your monk's main hand. You'll now have the Adamantine Mace just in your monk's offhand, and then your monk is going to reap all the benefits, ignoring bludgeoning resistance. And to get this mace, all you have to do is find the mold next to the Adamantine Forge waypoint, throw in some mithril, and it's all yours. And next up is a new trader trick in patch 7, and shout out to Morgana, who I learned this from. To do this trick, you'll need to have 2 containers and a corpse of a creature that won't count as stealing by looting it. So I chose the Addled Frog because it's light and easy to carry around, and also because I can't loot rats for some reason. So stand next to a trader, drop the corpse on the ground, and then click loot on the corpse of your chosen creature, and then talk to the trader to start trading. Sell them a container, and then open it, and then immediately you'll see the corpse's loot box open at the same time. Put all the stuff you want into the container you just sold them, then drag all that stuff into the loot box of the corpse. From there, close out of the trade window and drag all the stuff from the corpse onto the icon of your other container and all the stuff is yours. It's visually very buggy. I thought I was duping items, but unfortunately it's just a single copy of each item, despite it looking like copies, but a very effective trader trick if you can get yourself on a lightweight corpse that won't cause aggro by looting it. And next up is using Heat Metal on Grym. Heat Metal is a level 2 transmutation spell that deals fire damage and causes the target to drop their weapon or receive disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. If the target is only wearing armor, it will always receive disadvantage, and the spell is learned by level 3 bards and druids. However, what if we cast this on Grym? I see tons of comments, people saying that Heat Metal on Grym will cause Grym to get the condition called Superheated. So we're going to put this to the test. Superheated makes Grym vulnerable to bludgeoning damage and is typically obtained by having Grym walk on lava. But again, users claim that Heat Metal works to give it the very same condition. Well, I put it to the test, and actually Heat Metal does not cause Superheated. In fact, it does 0 damage to Grym. It does not apply Superheated, but it does apply the Heat Metal condition. So it does give Grym disadvantage like it should. So it's not totally useless, but if you want the Superheated condition, you can only give Grym that condition from the lava. And next up is how to keep the Caravan Strongbox containing the Iron Flask while also getting the reward for completing the quest, The Missing Shipment. By accepting the quest from Xaris and then saving Ollie and Rugen, you can choose the dialogue option telling them everyone is dead and that Xaris sent you. Then you can intimidate them for gold and they'll tell you that they'll deliver the Strongbox. Now at that point, you can just steal the Strongbox. Now whether you steal it without combat or you cause combat, just make sure to not kill Rugen or Oli once you have it. If you cause combat, you can just drink a potion of invisibility and escape. After you long rest and then return to Xaris, she'll give you the gold and the special stock of Brem will open up, giving you access to the Titanstring bow, the best bow in the game, but you do miss out on Herald, the crossbow, but I don't think it's anything special really, so this option is totally worth it if you want specifically the flask and the Titanstring bow. And next up is the Hearthlight Bomb. This is a grenade that you'd only ever obtain if you craft it. This grenade, when thrown, creates dancing lights where the bomb landed. This can be used to block a vent to allow for safe passage, or to be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. And in order to create the Hearthlight Bomb, you'll need to harvest Nightlight fronds, which can be harvested from Nightlight plants in the Underdark if you pass a DC 12 nature check. Alternatively, they are also sold by Dareth Bonecloak at the Myconid Colony in the Underdark, and most players probably have never seen this grenade, considering the only way to obtain it is by crafting it. And next up is the Hidden Heart of the Creator. Found within the Underdark is the Arcane Tower, and each floor above the basement contains a part of the epic tragedy known as the Roads to Darkness. The Threadbare Book, Evil's Ascent, and the remainder of the play are each on a different floor, and each one unlocks a new dialogue option with Bernard on the roof of the tower. By selecting the option unlocked by reading the Roads to Darkness, you can save yourself from having to battle Bernard. Then, by choosing the option unlocked by reading the Threadbare Book, he'll give you the ring that, when equipped, reveals the button leading to the basement of the tower, which has a number of treasures. But Evil's Ascent actually unlocks an option that leads to combat, so it's not necessarily recommended reading for that part of the play. However, if you choose the dialogue options reciting the play to Bernard, you'll actually be awarded with the Heart of the Creator, an inspiration point for any party member with an entertainer background. And while you're at the top of the tower, don't forget to break the chair of Hill Giant Strength for the Club of Hill Giant Strength. And next up is the Web Grenade. When thrown, this grenade creates a web surface which halves movement speed, can enweb creatures, and completely nullifies falling damage, which makes this grenade great if you don't have Feather Fall available. And webbed is caused if the target fails a DC 12 dexterity saving throw and causes the target to be unable to move. It grants advantage on attack rolls against said target, and the target will also have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws, which can help you with a lot of spells and cantrips. Most players probably miss the web grenade because you can only obtain it through alchemy by creating a suspension of spider silk from silk glands. These silk glands can be found on creatures and are also sold by Dareth Bonecloak at the Myconid Colony in the Underdark. And next up is a hidden interaction with a pair of super secret gloves. These gloves are the sparkle hands. On a hit with an unarmed attack, the wearer gains 2 lightning charges, and while imbued with lightning charges, attacks against metal constructs and foes wearing armor gain advantage. However, what might not seem obvious is that this also applies to throwing attacks, making these gloves actually incredible for a tavern brawler thrower. The lightning charges are great for increasing your chance to hit, dealing more damage, and gaining advantage on your throws are all incredible. Best of all, you can get these gloves super early on in Act 1. All you need to do is head head to the Sunlit Wetlands or the Putrid Bog, depending on if you dispel the illusion, then head all the way to the south until you reach the Decrepit Sanctuary. Once there, you can find these gloves within a wooden chest at the base of the giant tree stump. Be careful though, you'll need to fight off some wood woads, which can heal themselves, and ancient mud mephits, which will actually summon mud mephits that explode, dealing force damage upon death in an AoE. This can be difficult for a lower level party, especially on honor mode. My recommendation against those mud mephits which explode upon death is to toggle on non-lethal attacks to prevent the mud mephits from actually dying and dealing their area of effect splash damage against your party. And next up is a hidden interaction with ephemeral whispers. This condition is granted by wearing a whispering mask while Auntie Ethel is still alive. Each turn you must succeed a wisdom saving throw to prevent being charmed by Auntie Ethel. However, if you cast protection from evil and good on your character, then even if you fail the saving throw against ephemeral whispers, you won't become charmed. And by wearing the mask, you can actually walk directly through the poison gas clouds and traps leading to Auntie Ethel. You only need one character to lead the way with the mask in order to clear the way and make it safe for everyone else. So if you've ever wondered what's the best way to get through this area, or how are we intended to go through this area, I think the Whispering Mask is probably one of the intended ways to bypass all the traps in that descent. Not only that, but the Whispering Mask also allows you to see through gnarled doors. Now the first one is obvious, you have to go through it, but there is actually a second gnarled door that can be found within the trapped descent. This gnarled door can be found by taking the ladder down and then jumping up towards the door. Now inside there, you can actually find a mushroom circle that leads you to none other than the Underdark. And next up is a hidden weapon everyone missed. This weapon, like Falara Luve, is stuck and you'll need to pass a dialogue check in order to retrieve it. Unlike Falara Luve, this weapon is stuck in a chunk of meat and not stone. This weapon is located just north of the Blighted Village near the Bugbear and the Ogre Barn. Once you click on the weapon, you'll see a cinematic and will have a number of dialogue options: investigation, strength, or sleight of hand. Once you pass the dialogue check, you'll have a brand new weapon, a dagger +1. Now, not nearly as powerful nor as exciting as Falara Luve, it's still surprising that it got its own cinematic and a skill check in order to retrieve it. And next up is a rare cinematic that 99% of players missed. This cinematic only appears during an honor mode playthrough or where legendary actions are enabled. That's because this legendary action in particular, when used on a specific target, causes this cinematic, and that legendary action is called the Absolute's Will and is cast by Priestess Gut. The spell is a bonus action which uses telekinesis to pull targets closer. However, Priestess Gut can use this ability on the unstable statues within the Shattered Sanctum to literally pull the statue onto your character, dealing bludgeoning damage and knocking you prone. I was so surprised when I saw this cinematic because it's very rare to have a cinematic happen mid-combat, with the end of the Auntie Ethel fight as another example, but this is extremely cool to see after over 1,000 hours and having only just seen it now. And next up is a secret weapon that you can get as a quest reward that 99% of players missed. In Act 1, when you first encounter the Grove, Arca's brother Canon dies in the opening cinematic. After the battle is resolved, you can find Arca preparing to execute Saza, the captive goblin. By preventing Arca from killing Saza, you can then escort Saza out of the Grove and back to Minthara. Upon doing so, you'll complete the quest called Save the Goblin Saza and be rewarded with the Assassin's Touch, an uncommon dagger which deals an additional 1d4 necrotic damage to creatures that are knocked out or sleeping. This can be useful immediately as there are a number of sleeping goblins and bugbears right outside the Shattered Sanctum, and since most players probably don't help Saza escape, as seen by the 2.5% of players who earned the achievement for rescuing Saza, that means that the majority of players probably never saw this dagger. And next up is a secret quest reward from Timber. Timber is a squirrel you can find in the Emerald Grove at the top of the elevator. By having Speak with Animals on, you can have a conversation with Timber and come to an agreement that as long as you keep your feet on the ground and stay off the trees, you may share Timber's territory. And as an added bonus, Timber will actually give you a trinket, which is none other than a hyena ear, which is far from useless. You can use it to craft a potion of speed using 3 of them. You can find many more of these throughout the game, making this small, simple reward actually helpful. And since Timber is such a small creature and you'd need to have Speak with Animals, and since Timber starts dialogue with biting you, it's certainly a hidden reward that most players probably miss. And next up is a hidden rat that, when spoken to, will actually lead you to an evil thing. This rat is running around near Dammon in the Grove, and if you have Speak with Animals on, you'll be able to talk with it and discern that the rat tried to bite an an evil thing and hurt its tooth in the process. Once you progress through dialogue, the rat will lead you to this evil thing. However, it is locked behind a door. If you smash through, you'll enter into dialogue with Pendirna, who is paralyzed. You can learn from talking to her that Auntie Ethel sold her a potion that paralyzed her from the waist down. Now, unfortunately, the rat is pointing directly at the chest that Pendirna is sitting behind. Even if you move the chest, the rat will actually follow it around, and for some reason you cannot open it unless you first just steal it into your inventory, or maybe even unless you slay Pendirna. Now, once it's opened, you'll find a key to the alchemist's cabinet. Inside, you'll find a number of random potions and drow poison. And while the treasure that the rat led you to might not be a lot, it's certainly something that most players probably miss. And next up is a hidden interaction with the hag's victims. Ephron is one of Auntie Ethel's victims and is petrified within the entrance gallery of her lair. If you use basilisk oil on him, you will free him. However, he will die shortly after because he claims to be sick with the bite, which apparently he is because he dies. Now, however, if you defeat Auntie Ethel and do not let her get away in exchange for her hair, you can actually go back to Ephron, and he'll not only just lose the petrification on his own without the need of basilisk oil, but he'll also be magically cured of the sickness that was afflicting him. Talking with him reveals that it was Auntie Ethel that had both given him the sickness and petrified him as a supposed cure. And Ephron isn't the only one that you can come back to and interact with. The mirror facing the skull of Callum, you will originally see a spirit trapped within, pounding on the glass from the inside, trying to escape. If you break the mirror, you'll actually see a spirit float away from it, and you'll also get Bane until long rest. That's a condition. After you defeat Ethel, the mirror will appear to be normal. No spirit trapped inside. Lauren, another of the hag's victims, will also have his ailment cured, and you can learn how he wanted to be able to see the future. Now, not all the hag's victims were so lucky. You can see Magran, the decapitated elf, is of course too far gone and will remain holding her head. And interestingly, unlike many of the other hag victims who are cured once the hag is slain, for some reason Pendirna, who drank a potion Auntie Ethel gave her in the grove, does not recover from her paralyzation if you kill the hag. And next up is a hidden helm that most players miss. This helm is the Helmet of Autonomy, and the reason so many players probably miss it is because it's located on a skeleton at the entrance to the Festering Cove in the Underdark. The Festering Cove is one of the most missed areas in Baldur's Gate 3, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that the skeleton, which doesn't appear when you hold down Alt to reveal things that you can pick up, and it is tucked right next to the extremely dark entrance to the Festering Coves, which is often missed. Now, this helmet grants proficiency in wisdom saving throws, which can actually be quite helpful if you want to throw it on right before jumping into the Zaith'isk to help pass the wisdom saving throw. And next up is a hidden interaction with Susur flowers. These flowers can be found only within the Underdark near the Susu tree and behind the Arcane Tower. The primary use which most players will be using these flowers for is activating the elevator in the Arcane Tower, or even using them to disable your enemy from using spells. But did you know you can use the Susu flower to disable the constructs at the top of the tower? This can be extremely helpful when going up against Bernard on honor mode and you want to take out some of the additional enemies in that fight. Also, on your way to the Arcane Tower, you'll of course encounter arcane turrets, and these Susur flowers can also be used to disable the turrets, which is super convenient. And next up is a hidden interaction with the Mask of the Shapeshifter. This legendary helmet grants you Disguise Self. This mask is a reference to the mask with the same name from Divinity Original Sin 2, and it is exclusive to players who purchase the Digital Deluxe upgrade. What's interesting about this mask is it actually looks different depending on the race that puts it on. The forward-facing face will always match the race of the wielder. It's subtle and easy to miss seeing it change if you haven't worn it on different races. Now, there are a ton of possible faces that can be facing forward, including many options that don't even appear as side faces since there are so many, and the maximum faces on the mask at any given time is 4. When worn by a gnome, the face has this amusing smirk on it, and it's probably a side of the mask that most players haven't seen before. Of course, there's a Dragonborn face that will face forward if you're a Dragonborn, and also a dwarf face for a dwarf or Dwergar. Surprisingly though, when worn by Karlach, the mask does not change to have horns, but instead shows a more human-looking face. The mask also changes to that very same human-looking face whenever worn by strong humans, half-elves, or even drow. And this is because the mask is actually taking into account your body type. So Karlach has a femme strong body type and therefore gets that sort of human-looking face. Then there's a more elongated face for non-strong elf, high elf, wood elf, or drow. And then there's even a tiefling face with horns if worn worn by a non-strong tiefling. There's also a notably Githyanki face with that tiny little nose that seems to be the center of a black hole on their face. The halfling face is pretty ordinary looking, but with a big smile rather than the more neutral look of the human looking face. And then there's even an orc face with tusks and all for an orc wearing the mask, which looks really cool. And even if you aren't playing as these races, anytime you use the mask to disguise yourself, the front facing face will always match the race you just disguised as. So it'll always match, which is really cool. And that is not all there is to the mask. If you like getting race required bonuses from equipment, which is often Githyanki in Baldur's Gate 3, you can even disguise yourself and get those bonuses even though you're not that race, and you can then keep your original race's features on top of that. However, if you don't like how the race looks that you're disguising into, you can actually take the mask off after disguising, then take a long rest while still having your disguise on, and when you wake up in the morning, your disguise will be gone, but you'll actually keep the racial bonuses from your equipment of the race you disguised as. So, you won't get, race-specific dialogue options anymore, but if you just want those equipment bonuses and still look the same as you designed your character, then that is a neat trick that you should try out. And next up is how to make Underdark cast Bone Chill on you instead of hitting you during his ritual in the Shattered Sanctum. Now, this is actually way harder than it seems. If you're not familiar with Underdark, you can partake in his ritual to obtain Loviatar's love. This permanent condition can be very helpful, granting you a +2 bonus to attack rolls and wisdom saving throws when at or below 30% health. Now, surprisingly, you can even succeed in his ritual and obtain this condition by failing all 3 constitution checks, which can easily be done by eating some rotten food found in the next room before the roll, because it gives you disadvantage on those rolls. Or if you want to just automatically succeed all 3 checks without even having to roll, you can also just play as a bard. But to get Underdark to cast Bone Chill instead of hitting you, all you need to do is steal every single weapon in the room. But that's not all. You need to also send those weapons to camp. Now, when attempting the ritual wearing Loviatar's Scourge, he literally took the weapon out of my hands to use on me. So it required that I sent every weapon I had to camp just to make sure he doesn't grab the nearest weapon to use. Then he has no choice but to use Bone Chill on you instead. Since Bone Chill is necrotic damage, it would have been really cool to hold his weapon, Loviatar's Scourge, which grants resistance to necrotic damage, so to reduce the damage, but still, seeing Underdark use Bone Chill for the ritual is probably something most players missed. And next up is a weapon that is actually way stronger than you might think. If you're like me and didn't get into the patch 8 stress test, you might be wishing you could be playing with Booming Blade. Booming Blade is a cantrip that allows the caster to strike with their melee weapon, dealing additional damage if the target moves. The damage starts at 1d8 thunder when the target moves and scales up at level 5 and 10. However, this weapon, the Hunter's Dagger, is somewhat of a Booming Blade itself, with its rupturing feature. On a hit, the target becomes ruptured for 3 turns. Ruptured causes the target to take 1d4 piercing damage each step they take, lasting 3 turns or until it deals as many instances of damage as it has turns remaining. Not only that, but due to a bug, rupturing applies 100% of the time after a hit, even though it states it requires a DC 13 Constitution saving throw. Now, this opens up all the same possibilities that you'd have with Booming Blade, just at lower damage. As a thief with 2 bonus actions, you could hit and then shove, or hit and then disengage, and so on. This weapon can be purchased from none other than Roa Moonglow in Act 1 within the Shattered Sanctum, or Act 2 within Moonrise Towers. And it's also one of the few items that appear twice in Roa's stock, so you can dual wield them right off the bat. This means you could run around rupturing multiple enemies in a single turn to rack up that damage. And next up is the Secret Chest of Transformation. In Act 2 within the Underdark, there is the Arcane Tower. On the northern balcony on the main floor, you can find the Chest of the Mundane. If you open it, you will see mundane items such as a mug, a ladle, a plate, a cup, and so on. And if you take any item out or put any item into it, your character will say that it is a chest of transformation, and you'll see these seemingly mundane items turn into valuable magical items. This transformation makes one wonder if the chest is actually transforming the items into mundane items and transforming them back when they were removed, or if it is just an illusion and the chest is simply making them appear different. Now, interestingly, if you put a container into the chest of transformation, you can then drag and drop items from within that container onto other items in the chest and have them revert back to their normal form, but still remain in the chest, which shouldn't be possible. And while there doesn't seem to be a practical use for having these items retain their form well in the chest, it seems containers strike again, allowing us to do things we shouldn't be able to do. And next up is how to unlock all illithid powers in Act 1 by doubling the amount of Mind Flayer parasites you gain by consuming a Mind Flayer tadpole, allowing you to get 18 Mind Flayer powers, which is 3 more than you would ever need to get in order to get every single illithid power as early as Act 1. By keeping all your Mind Flayer parasites you acquire in a pouch, once your dream visitor finally tells you to embrace your powers, the next Mind Flayer parasite you encounter will trigger a cutscene. All your tadpoles will become counters in the top right. However, you'll still have them as items within your container, and when you remove them from your container, they will add to your count of tadpoles in the top right once again, effectively doubling the amount of illithid powers you can choose. So in Act 1, there are a total of 12 illithid tadpoles to obtain. You can acquire 6 from killing true souls, which include Shor Ragzlin, Edowin, Flind, Gut, Minthara, and Near. You can also find a specimen in the Enclave Library in the Druid Grove, near where you find Nettie, and 3 more are found in the Githyanki Kresh Infirmary, and finally 2 more can be earned as quest rewards, 1 for helping Near kill off deep gnomes and Dwergar, and 1 for helping Minthara raid the Grove. The hardest part about this is lining up your long rests, since you can't take too many or else you'll kind of miss your window to double activate your tadpoles by triggering the cutscene too soon before you have enough tadpoles, because after that cutscene, the next tadpole you encounter will trigger that cutscene. So since progressing to the mountain pass forces a long rest, that's what sort of makes this tricky to collect all of them without triggering that cutscene. However, if it's not in honor mode, you can always save and load to make sure everything lines up perfectly and get all of your illithid powers in Act 1. And next up is a secret Tav dialogue. It's not every day you can get Tav to actually say a line, but there are a few in the game. One scenario where you can actually hear your Tav say a line, other than when you're clicking around interacting with stuff, is when you encounter the Githyanki near the mountain pass, but only if you have no companions. This dialogue is most likely in the game to warn you that this is a hard fight that should only be taken if you're at least level 5. Companions typically will indicate whether or not you'd stand a chance by either saying, let's avoid them if you're below level 5, or let's engage them if you're level 5 or above. And if there are no companions to notify you of the difficult fight, well, then Tav does it instead. Interestingly, even if your Tav is above level 5, you'll still get the same dialogue to avoid the fight, probably because it would be a difficult fight to solo, even if you were level 5 or above.
Facing that lot would be suicide. At least for now.
And next up is another secret Tav dialogue. Getting your Tav to actually say something is super rare, and this particular trigger is one that most players probably missed. If you end up helping the goblins sack the Emerald Grove, then at the after party at your camp, you actually have the option to kill all the goblins. And if you do, your Tav will actually have something to say.
What's done is done. We should check the corpses for valuables.
And next up is how to skip past the Rosy Morn Monastery and go straight through to the Githyanki Kresh. Usually you need to find a way around the locked door that leads to the Githyanki Kresh, usually by scaling up the monastery and then dropping down, but instead, right when the cinematic plays with the Githyanki and the Absolute Cultists near the front door, if you select the attack button in the bottom left, you can engage the 2 Githyanki in battle, and if you win, the door will remain open. This can actually save you a lot of time if you just want to go straight into the Githyanki Kresh and don't want to do anything within the Rosy Morn Monastery. And next up is a secret spell interaction with Heroism. Heroism is a level 1 enchantment spell which makes yourself or a target immune to Frightened and gain 5 temporary hit points each turn. However, what the spell doesn't say is that it can be used to remove Frightened from a target that already has it. This can be helpful when you really need a character to lose the Frightened condition immediately, and although it's not as good as having protection from evil and good on beforehand to make yourself immune to fear, this can be a helpful backup plan. And Heroism can be learned as a level 1 Bard or level 2 Paladin and can be granted from the Absolute's Warboard.